One of the less celebrated benefits of creatine supplementation is what it does to your muscles after they've been put through something genuinely hard. Not the performance during the session, that's well covered, but the recovery after it. Specifically, creatine has documented effects on the markers and experience of exercise-induced muscle damage, and understanding those effects changes how you think about supplementation beyond performance. Exercise-induced muscle damage, often abbreviated EIMD, is the microscopic structural disruption that occurs in muscle fibers during intense or unfamiliar exercise. It's particularly pronounced with eccentric contractions, the lowering phase of a lift, the deceleration phase of running, any movement where a muscle produces force while lengthening. Markers of EIMD include elevated blood creatine kinase, myoglobin, and inflammatory cytokines, along with the subjective experience of delayed onset muscle soreness, the stiffness and tenderness that typically peaks 24 to 48 hours after the session. Creatine supplementation consistently reduces these markers across multiple studies. Supplemented individuals show lower post-exercise creatine kinase levels, lower myoglobin concentrations, lower inflammatory marker responses, and in most studies reduced severity and duration of delayed onset muscle soreness. The mechanisms behind this protective effect aren't completely characterized, but several contributing factors have been proposed. The enhanced phosphocreatine availability may allow muscles to maintain ATP levels closer to adequate during the most intense moments of a session, reducing the metabolic stress that triggers inflammatory cascades. Cell volumization, the intracellular water retention that creatine produces, may improve the structural rigidity of muscle cells, reducing the degree of fiber disruption under eccentric load. The enhanced satellite cell activity that creatine produces may accelerate the repair response, limiting the duration of the inflammatory phase, and creatine's documented effects on certain antioxidant pathways, specifically its interaction with reactive oxygen species production during intense exercise, may limit oxidative damage in the post-exercise period. The practical consequence of these protective effects is not just comfort, though being less sore is a legitimate quality of life benefit. Reduced muscle damage means a faster return to training capacity. If your muscles are less damaged after a hard session, you can train again sooner with comparable quality. In training programs that involve high-frequency multiple sessions per week targeting the same muscle groups, this recovery acceleration is a genuine training advantage, not a marginal one. Elite athletes training 2 or 3 times per day are arguably the population where this recovery benefit matters most. But recreational athletes training 4 to 5 times per week also benefit meaningfully from a shorter recovery window between sessions. There's also a longer-term structural consideration. Repeated cycles of muscle damage and repair over months and years of training are one of the mechanisms by which muscle tissue grows and becomes more resilient. If creatine slightly reduces the magnitude of each damage episode while maintaining, or even improving, the adaptive signal from that damage, the net result across a training career, is more cumulative growth with less total structural cost. This is the recovery dimension of creatine that most content reduces to a footnote. It deserves more attention than it typically gets. The specific cytokines involved in exercise-induced muscle damage are worth naming because they're part of how researchers know creatine is actually affecting the inflammatory process rather than just the symptom. Interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and C-reactive protein are the primary inflammatory markers elevated after intense eccentric exercise. Several creatine studies show blunted post-exercise rises in these cytokines compared to placebo, suggesting that the protective effect operates at the level of inflammatory signaling, not just structural damage. The mechanism most likely involves the improved ATP availability during exercise. When ATP doesn't drop as sharply, the cell stress response is less severe, and the inflammatory cascade that stress triggers is smaller. There's also consideration around training programming that creatine's recovery effect speaks directly to. Many coaches and training programs build in mandatory rest days not because the nervous system needs it, but because the muscles need time to reduce soreness and inflammation enough to train with adequate quality. The recovery benefit is real, Mike. It just requires adequate training intensity to be meaningfully relevant.